Hi everyone, I'm Robin in the Winter, and today I'll be showing the process I went through to develop my character designs for Anna Miriam Brown on Instagram's 12 Disciples Art Contest. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the contest, the challenge was to create unique character designs for Jesus and the 12 disciples, as well as Mary Magdalene. The designs could be in any genre, modern day, fantasy, sci-fi, and with that liberty given to me, I dove right off the deep end and thought to myself, what would it be like if the story of Jesus was turned into a colorful cartoon space adventure? Because I've been really wanting to do sci-fi lately. When you think about it, the account of Jesus' ministry actually has a lot of similarities to traditional adventure story. It's a group of very different people, all brought together to travel on a quest, with the narrative revolving around a chosen one destined to defeat evil and save the day through a self-sacrifice. Stories like these have always had a place in my heart, and so I thought it would be fun to see how it would look to filter the Bible through this lens of, creative science fiction. As someone who grew up in the church, I think it's easy for those familiar with the Bible to allow their eyes to kind of glaze over while reading it. At least I've had this experience. But the truth is, the Bible is a pretty weird and interesting story, and a lot of crazy and exciting things happen in it. You got miracles, plagues, prophecies, yet sometimes when we hear these stories over and over, we kind of fail to appreciate just the craziness of them and just how interesting they are. Which is why I think a project like this, where you're removing the immediate context of the Bible, can allow people to experience these stories for the first time again, and hopefully give them a new appreciation for Scripture. At least that was my thought process going into this. But naturally, each specific character required their own thoughtful approach, and so because he is first of all things to begin with, I started with Jesus. I feel a pretty strong need to defend myself with this portrayal of Jesus, simply because he is God and most influential being to ever live, and anyone who has any opinion about him likely holds that opinion very strongly. But I cannot emphasize enough to you how much this portrayal made sense to me as a Christian. I think it's primarily because of the unlikely hero trope and how Jesus did quite literally fulfill that concept. Isaiah 53:2 describes how Jesus had no beauty that we should desire him. And as well as that, many Jewish people at the time he was born and lived had a lot of false expectations about what the Messiah was going to be like, imagining a powerful warrior rather than a humble servant. Having this character inspired by Jesus look very small and unthreatening helped convey these ideas visually, I feel, and they also made a very interesting juxtaposition because he is that important to the narrative. I also think it's fitting because Jesus was the most loving, kind individual to ever exist, and the human response to him was just, let's kill him. Let's kill the guy. I wanted this design to kind of convey just how, I guess, screwed up it was that was humans' response to God on Earth. And making this character look that sympathetic, just for him to be murdered, I think it fits the gospel narrative. I think it makes sense to me. But since it would be kind of weird to just call him Jesus, I gave each of the characters different names that would kind of fit with this fiction setting, and for him, I chose Novin, because it sounds spacey, it sounds like Nova. I think it also would make it interesting as a story when you don't know who the characters are necessarily. You just kind of have to figure it out through context clues. But anyway, my second design is for Simon Peter, and I'm pretty happy with how this one turned out. It was hard to get the colors right, but anyway. Since Peter was a fisherman, a lot of my inspiration came from that. I made his species have fish-like qualities, and I based his clothes off of trying to make them look very pirate-like. Some of his bird features, like his tail and talons, and the bright red color palette came from that pirate inspiration as well, as both fish and birds navigate long distances, just like pirates and sailors do. And I think that made the character feel very at home as a sailor and traveling on a boat. I also gave him a birthmark that looked like a star on his forehead because in this space fantasy world I'm imagining for this, boats would travel through the cosmos and travel through space instead of through water. And being a space sailor is very important to this character, just as being a fisherman was to Peter. There is very much a Treasure Planet inspiration with this story, I'm just going to say. The whole idea is kind of reminiscent of how Treasure Planet took the Treasure Island book and turned it into a sci-fi adventure. It's I realized that kind of after the fact, but what can you do? So, anyway, I named this character Kairos, but after Novin met him, he decided to change his name to Averon, so I guess we're stuck with that now. But anyway, next off is Renai, which is my character based off of Andrew, Peter's brother. And oh, you do not know how quickly I became obsessed with this character. I drew just one sketch of his face, and I was like, yep, that's just him fully formed out of my imagination. He kind of just sprang forth with no context behind him. And so I decided to give him just as much unnecessary tragic backstory as I could. Not necessarily tragic, but I came up with too many headcanons for Andrew, guys. The Bible doesn't give us much information about, like, what his actual personality was like, so a lot of what I did just came from imagining what his dynamic with Peter would be. As Peter holds this role of, like, huge significance in the Bible, which pretty much overshadows Andrew's existence. You kind of see Peter, James, John as, like, the people most around Jesus, but then Andrew you just hear less about. So I thought to myself, how would Andrew feel about that? My decision was not great. As much as these two brothers get along and love each other, there's a lot of tension in this relationship that I decided to just put in there for the sake of drama. But Novin is gonna fix all that, guys. It's fine. It's good. Anyway, design-wise, he was pretty much tied to the species I made for Averon, but I went with cooler blue tones for him since he has a much more laid-back personality. The twigs in his hair and the one he's holding in his teeth are to emphasize that laid-back personality, as well as nod to the fact Andrew was originally a disciple of John the Baptist, living out in the woods in less than hygienic conditions. My canon for Renai is that he used to be way more concerned about his appearance and cleanliness until he ended up as a follower of John, and that all just kind of went out the window. So, after him, we have the Sons of Thunder, the brothers James and John, which top off Jesus' inner circle of disciples. So I took this nickname, Sons of Thunder, and I sort of ran with it, backed up by the fact these guys made some pretty crazy statements once or twice in the Bible.
Defending your honor.
They reviled and humiliated you.
They deserve to have bolts of lightning rain down and incinerate them!
Yes, fire from the heavens.
Fire.
But anyway, my idea was to make John resemble lightning and James resemble thunder, and so kind of this dynamic duo appeal with them. They just look very distinctly opposed from one another, and yet their personalities very much sync up when they're together. So, John's character, who I named Zurich, has this super lean muscular design with jagged edges and these just bright yellow stem-sized lightning, while James, who I named Torin, has darker purple tones, and he has a much larger physique with some features. I think that I tried to make him look a bit bull-like with the nose and tail, and the teeth are very reminiscent of a gargoyle, I think. Just kind of friendly looking, but also kind of menacing. They both wear bandages around their knuckles, which is a warning sign that they are both good fighters. They will punch your lights out if they feel the need or desire. I really like these two, since I feel like they have a very much chaotic duo vibe that just is very anime-esque, but also just cartoonish, and it's fun for me. But there's definitely some character arcs they're gonna need to go on. But finally, I have my design for Matthew. And this is the one with which I completely devastated a friend of mine. You yourselves may also wonder, how could I have done this to poor Matthew? But I chose this design for a few reasons. One, I wanted to separate my idea for the character from the interpretation presented in The Chosen show. I love The Chosen's portrayal of Matthew, a lot. I really connected with him when I first watched the show. But I did not want to subconsciously copy him, and I was worried that might be something I would end up doing. So instead, I tried to make him more villainous. I have personally really loved it when cartoons have those fun, outlandish bad guy characters with just these horrible personalities. And I really also like redemption arcs when they're done well in stories. So my inspiration for Matthew's character, which I named Severin, came from two main sources. One, he was physically kind of designed, inspired by the Serpentine from Ninjago, and like the snake people from Wingfeather. I really like snake looking bad guys. There's so much joy I get out of them. You guys don't even know. But I really wanted to make him snake looking, and then his species is also going to be kind of representative of the Pharisees in this story, and it's cause they were called snakes by Jesus and John. That's straight up, that's the reason. But anyway, his personality was kind of inspired by Starscream from Transformers Prime, because I just happened to be watching the show when I was working on these, and I was just like, yes, that's perfect. But my reason to give him such a kind of creepy design was I really wanted him to feel like a villain character that was just thrown in among these good guys and is now working with them, and just feels very awkward and out of place. Because Matthew's story is being a tax collector who was a social outcast, suddenly being called with Jesus and having to be around these people who likely he did not have good standing with. And it's that redemption arc story that I wanted to explore with this, and I wanted to make that obvious visually. As for his clothing designs, I gave him like scarlet clothing and like golden jewelry to kind of show off his wealth compared to the others, and I also feel like, I don't know, in a way it doesn't suit him because I guess just green and red, and I feel like that's kind of important as well because he is like this traitor character, and he's supposed to kind of, I don't know. But anyway, the cloak is to make him look like kind of has a Cobra Hood style, like have that in his silhouette, and also so I don't have to draw him either with or without hair, because I tried imagining both and they both look terrible to me. I couldn't see a good way of doing that, but that's why his species is just going to mostly wear stuff on their head, because I can't even. But anyway, that concludes the first half of reimagining the 12 disciples as aliens. If you have any design comments or critiques, I'd be curious to hear them, because I'd like to be able to improve these designs best I can. If you enjoyed the video, I'm planning on making a sequel to talk about what it went into the rest of the designs, which I had to be a little more creative for since they had less descriptions about like their character and things they do in the Bible. Till then, hope you all had a great day, and I'll see you next time. Bye.